Welcome, everyone. Welcome. I'm very excited to have you here today. My name is Leela Ansart. I'm the CEO of Leadership Impact Strategies. We are the trusted partners that executive leaders call to rapidly boost team alignment, accountability, and execution. And today, I want to pull back the curtain on one of the tools that we use in our diagnostic process to surface a pretty big problem, and one that I want to give you not only the problem, but also the solution today. So, a study came out recently that showed 4 out of every 10 workers are losing at least one full workday every week. I want to spend the next hour with you showing you exactly what's driving that and how to tell if it's happening in your organization. And then, of course, what you can do about it. Let's get started. All right, so as I mentioned, 42% of workers are losing at least one full workday every single week. And this number points to a specific diagnosable problem. And the reason I can say that with confidence is because of how we approach this kind of work, this kind of team execution and team alignment and team productivity work. Now, before I get into what the research found, let me give you 30 seconds of context that will make everything else more useful for you. So if you look at the image on your screen here, you're going to see our client journey. Now, when clients bring us in to help them with something, we begin every engagement the same way. We spend time in discovery, understanding what's unique about the team and what's actually driving the results that they're seeing or not seeing. And from there, we diagnose the root problem before we design anything. That's non-negotiable for us. A solution built on guess, without data is certainly not going to be a good fit solution. Then we design a custom program based on what surfaces, we deliver it to the team, and then we measure what shifts and make sure that that is sustainable over time and they can leverage that knowledge and those insights throughout their organization. Today, what I'm going to share with you is a part of step 2. It's one of the key diagnostic tools that we use during this step. And I want to share with you kind of a look under the hood at our process. So as mentioned, 42%, the stat says, 42% of workers are spending more than a full day every week doing work that actively fights how they're naturally wired to operate. And this is according to a Colby Corp Workplace Reality Report. Now, if you think about this, 42% are spending more than a full day outside of their zone of genius. That's the equivalent of your entire team going dark every Monday, except everyone's calendar says they're in the building and working. Now, you might be thinking there's no way this could be happening in my organization, and maybe not, but I'm going to give you some warning signs in a moment that you can look for to find out. All right, so let's talk about where we're going to go today before we get into those warning signs. So I'm going to show you the data on what's actually driving the hidden drain on your team's capacity, their energy, and their retention, and how to recognize if it's happening in your organization. I'm going to walk you through the data. What is being affected, right? How is that affecting you, and what does it really look like in your organization? We're going to talk about the missing link, what people are trying versus what's actually working, and show you the exact tool that we use with our clients. And then I'm going to share with you something concrete that you can use in the next 30 days to start to get both information and an action tool that you can use. So, a moment ago, I said that we were going to talk about some warning signs to acknowledge and to identify if this is happening, if this kind of lost capacity is happening in your organization. And so let's get into that. Let's get into what those warning signs might be for you. So warning sign number 1 is that execution keeps lagging and you can't figure out why. So you've got a critical team, or you've got, your department, and it's fully staffed. Your strategy is clear, and yet those critical projects are still consistently late or not hitting the mark at all. It may be that your people are spending significant chunks out of their week working in ways that cost them 2 to 3 times the energy to produce the same output. Warning sign number 2. Your high performers are burning out. And these are the people that we least want to lose if we have to lose anyone, right? They're reliable, they absorb the gaps, they say yes. And somewhere along the way, they just hit that wall and it's too much. According to this same Colby Workplace Reality Report that I cited a moment ago, nearly 40% of professionals say their current stress level is not sustainable long term. And 60% actually say they don't have enough energy left for life outside of work. So if that's not showing up in your team yet, then it's certainly something that you want to watch for. By the way, if you're an individual contributor listening to this might be naming your experience at work. And if it sounds familiar, it's because the data confirms what you've been feeling. And stick with us because we're going to help you to see what you could do as well with this information. All right. Warning sign number 3, your retention is higher than expected, or you have turnover that just surprised you, right? Genuinely surprised you. This same research that I've been citing says that nearly 38% of workers are already considering leaving because of this energy drain on them. And the reason actually has nothing to do with pay or even management. They simply can't consistently work in ways that draw on their natural strengths. And they're saying they're actually considering leaving their job because of that. And obviously, we don't want to wait until that already happens. All right, your last warning sign is that in meetings and with projects, your team keeps going in circles instead of moving forward. So you have a team meeting. That meeting should produce decisions, but instead of decisions, it produces more meetings, right? Good ideas get stuck, or your team keeps generating new ideas and they never commit to something and then take action. So that pattern, if you're seeing it, is a flag for sure. The 5th sign, which I know I said 4 signs here, but I want to give you a bonus, and that is this idea of employee mood. So, a recent study says that waking up on the right or wrong side of the bed can have a persistent effect. It actually makes productivity in the workplace fall by over 10%. That's from the Wharton School of Executive Education. So, if you've had your finger on the pulse of what's been going on in our workplaces right now, you've probably heard this idea of mood. And it's kind of funny that as leaders, we're talking about mood in the workplace. But more and more researchers and management experts are starting to realize that the affective part of the brain, which is our mood and emotions, actually has a pretty significant impact on our productivity. And so this is something you want to be watching for too. If you're seeing kind of a lowered mood in your workplace, then this is a sign that you may be having one of these problems. Now, on top of all of this, I want to name something that I think is sitting in the room, and it's one of those, elephants in the room, as they say. So, the environment that we are working in right now, that our leaders, our teams, our people are working in right now, is genuinely just a hard one. Geopolitical instability, rapid changes driven by AI. Some people saying it's going to be the solution to everything. Others are saying it's going to be the end of the world and the end of us. Workloads that haven't gone down despite every promise that tech is somehow going to make that change for us and buy us back time. In fact, Fortune recently reported that for many workers, AI tools are actually increasing cognitive load, with time spent on some tasks going up by as much as 346%. And their deep focused work hours are dropping. So underneath all of these things, right, all of these factors, people are carrying even more. They're carrying a load that has nothing to do with their role at work. They're tired. Many of them are caring for their aging parents or for their children simultaneously. And trust in institutions and leadership, it's been dropping for a while, and it's actually thinner right now than it has been in a long time. I liken it to riding a bicycle, but on a freeway with 5 lanes of traffic. That's how it can feel. It can feel like there's just so much going on. And no matter how hyper alert you are and watching around, there's always risks around every corner. And so that's really the world in which us and our people are working in right now. And as leaders, to find real solutions, we have to acknowledge this reality because it's influencing the output of our employees. And so we're going to talk about, what we can do to make a difference, because this environment we're living in is not something that we can change. On top of all of this, there's actually more. We're asking people to work against how they're naturally wired. And this study that I'm citing, it was a study of over 1,000 different professionals, and it quantified the result of having people work against how they're naturally wired. So get nerdy with me here for a minute, because I'm going to get into the data, and I think you're really going to find it fascinating. All right. So, according to this Colby Workplace Reality Report, as mentioned, 42% of workers are spending more than a quarter of their work week, which is roughly one full day, doing work that actively fights how they're naturally wired to operate. Work that requires them to operate outside of their instinctive approach, which costs exponentially more energy to produce the same output. And this represents an invisible drain on both energy and performance. In fact, when researchers asked what drains their energy most at work, 37% said it was being asked to work against how they naturally operate. In fact, they ranked it above unclear expectations, above a big workload, and even above difficult colleagues. So, in a world where people are already running on fumes, this is actually what's draining their tank the fastest. I mentioned earlier that 60% of professionals said that they don't have enough energy left after work for their personal lives, and 38% said their stress level is not sustainable long term. Right? So, this is where the compounding starts. So, research from the University of Maryland, the Robert H. Smith School of Business, found that organizations that ignore or suppress emotional states, employee emotional states, consistently underperform than those who actively manage those emotional states. And there was a separate study that tracked frontline workers across 18 consecutive workdays and found that daily emotional states directly correlated with daily performance output. So, in other words, right, kind of common sense, but the study showed on harder days, people produced less. And this happened consistently. So, here's where we get into kind of a compounding issue. The chain looks like this. Misfit work creates chronic stress, which drives sustained negative mood. And that negative mood degrades the actual quality of the worker output. So that's documented, a measurable pattern. And in the macro environment that people are operating in right now, that chain is moving faster than it ever has. So when we think about team performance, which is what my organization spends all of our time on, team performance and team execution, organizations who lead are the ones figuring out and modifying and adjusting for these factors. So it's not just, oh, that's a factor, let's acknowledge it, or let's perhaps even ignore it, which many organizations are doing. It's really about how do we take these insights and how do we design for them so that we get better results. According to the same report, workers spending more than 25% of their work in misfit work, which is what we're going to call this work that works against our natural instincts, they are 1.5 times more likely to be actively considering leaving their job. Eventually, the people who carry the heaviest load of mismatch work start looking for the exit. But there's actually a signal that predicts departure even earlier than that, and most people aren't even tracking it. You're going to find this part very fascinating. You ever heard of the word flow? Workers who rarely experience flow, which is that state when someone is fully absorbed, working naturally, kind of, time feels like it's moving quickly. When people are in this state, they are when they rarely experience this state, they are 4 times more likely to be looking for an alternate job. 4 times more likely to be actively job hunting when they don't experience flow at work. So if this is not something that you've got your pulse on in your organization, perhaps we should, right? When we're looking at retention, when we're looking at making sure that we don't lose our highest performers and our valued employees. So how do you have a tool, or how do you even measure this idea of flow? I kind of want to talk about for a minute our tools. What are we measuring? And is this something that's already in the tools that we're using? So most people have taken a personality assessment, right? An MBTI or a DISC. or some kind of skills assessment like an SAT or even a skills assessment that might have to do with the role that they're filling, those kinds of assessments. But there is a third part of what we can assess in the mind that gets left out of these commonly used tools. And it's the part that measures your instinctive approach to solving problems and to executing. You ready to hear what we use? Okay, let's get into it. I want to introduce you to the Colby A Index, which is a assessment. It's the only one of its kind that measures one specific thing, how you're wired to take action when you're free to be yourself. So let me go ahead and show you how this works. So as I mentioned a moment ago, there are different assessments that measure different parts of our mind, right? So we're going to talk about those for a minute. The three parts of the mind, if you look at the circle here, are the cognitive, which is the thinking part of your mind, and that's your intelligence, your knowledge, your skills, your experiences, and your learned behavior. Then the second part of your mind is the affective part, and that is your feeling part of your mind. It also includes, let me change this slide. It also includes your motivators, your preferences, your values, the things that really drive your behavior from that second part, that affective part of the mind. And a lot of people call that, personality. Some of that's personality, some of it's values, and those two things are distinct. But that's measured in the affective part of the mind. And as I mentioned a moment ago, that's your assessments like DISC and predictive index and Myers-Briggs and things of that nature, right? The Enneagram, those are all assessments that measure that. What we don't see in the workplace as broadly, and there's definitely several companies using this, and you get to be on the inside scoop now. But what we don't see is the assessment that's measuring the cognitive part of the mind, which is how we do, how we take action, how we execute and solve problems. So the Colby A assessment that I mentioned, the Colby A index, is the only assessment available to measure this part of the mind. Let me share a little bit more about what the Colby A is and what it isn't. So first of all, it's an unbiased assessment. It's been shown scientifically that the results are not influenced by gender, by age, or by race. So it's a scientifically validated tool. In addition, the Colby A index is positive, and meaning it's focused on strengths, and it's also predictive of performance, which is kind of cool because you can imagine where we can use these insights. And then finally, it's valid and reliable. In fact, studies show that in over 90% of cases, there's no statistically significant change in someone's Colby index result after 20 years. So when we think about this, it's positive, it's predictive, it's focused purely on instincts, which means there's no right result or wrong result. No one comes out of this assessment looking like a problem. Everyone does come out with a very clear picture of how they do their best work and how to stay in that instinctive flow that we talked about. Pretty cool, right? There are many organizations. I mentioned this is not overly used yet, but it's proven. It's been around for over 50 years. And there are organizations all over the world who use the Colby assessment in their process, both for team building, for hiring, for performance reviews and coaching, all of those different applications. The Colby has been and is currently being used in the organizations you see on the screen here, as well as many more. All right, let's do a quick exercise. Before I get into more of the detail, I want to have you experience what it feels like to be out of your instinctive flow. So if you can do me a quick favor and grab a pen or pencil and a piece of paper. Okay, I'll wait for you. All right, on your piece of paper, I want you to use your regular dominant hand, and I want you to write your first and your last name. Okay. Should be pretty quick. We're used to doing that. Now I want you to switch to the other hand, your non-dominant hand, and write it again. Now, what did you notice? When I do this in a in-person session, we get a lot of laughter here. It takes longer, right? Writing your name with that non-dominating hand requires you to concentrate more. It's messier, even if you're trying hard. And if I told you to practice that for 1,000 hours, yes, it would get better, but it would more than likely never feel natural to you because it isn't. And that's what working against your cognitive wiring feels like. It's not impossible. It's not a catastrophic thing that you have to do, but it's consistently harder than it needs to be day after day, week after week. And for 42% of your workforce, according to that workplace reality report, that is the kind of mental energy and results that's happening from being placed in roles where we are working outside of our cognitive strengths and our cognitive instincts. So, what's really cool is the Colby-A index tells you exactly where your cognitive instincts are, where your strengths are, through its measurement of four distinct modes. And let's get into that. So, your MO, or your mode of operation, is your natural behavior pattern when you're free to be yourself and when you're taking purposeful action. I want to note here something quickly. All strengths are equally positive. No numbers, even though you see numbers here in a moment, are better or worse. And every mode or every individual factor represents behaviors on a continuum. So, knowing your cognitive MO gives you language to describe your contributions and your needs. And it helps you to give yourself the freedom to go with these instincts so that you can operate at peak efficiency with less stress. Let's talk about striving instincts. There are different kind of instincts, and I just want to take a second to clarify. I'm not talking about maternal instincts or fight or flight instincts when we're in a stress state. We're going to be talking about striving instincts today. And the striving instincts that Colby has identified deal with the behaviors or the pattern or the MO that you use to solve problems. When you're solving a problem, when you're making a decision, when you are taking purposeful action, when you're free to be yourself, to be in flow, it may feel like that in flow idea, then you operate at peak efficiency and you have less stress. But let me be clear, when we talk about what it means to be in striving action, when we're striving, it's the things you see on the top of the list there. It's not so much when we're taking action when we're de-stressing or relaxing. It's not striving action when we're operating from muscle memory. When you've done something that's difficult, but you've done it a million times and you're not really thinking about it anymore, that's not striving action. Or if you're performing as you've been taught is the right way to do it. And we oftentimes do this. We just, again, it's sort of a muscle memory situation. If you're doing it the way that you were told it was right, then you may not be in striving action. The Colby assessment identifies four action modes, four categories of how people naturally take action. The first one is the fact finder, and this is how you deal with information, how you gather and share information. Do you instinctively research thoroughly, compare multiple options, verify the details before you take your move? Or do you work better having a broad picture and figuring out specifics as you go? That's the fact finder mode. Secondly, we have the follow through mode, which is how you organize and structure work. Do you naturally create systems, processes, and plans? Or do you find rigid structure creates friction and you do a lot better with flexibility? That's me, by the way. So, this is our follow through mode. The third one is called the quick start mode, which is how you deal with risk and uncertainty. So, do you instinctively move towards the new idea, the experience, the experiment, or pivoting? Or do you naturally stabilize, protect what's working, and prefer to use proven methods? That's what that quick start is measuring. And then finally, our fourth mode is called the implementer, which is how you relate to the physical and the tangible. So for this one, we're not talking about implement as in the verb. We're talking about implement as in the noun, like a tool that you're holding in your hands. So the implementer mode is how you relate to the physical and tangible. How do you instinctively build or demonstrate or prototype? How do you come up with solutions? Is it in the 3D world, something you can hold? Or do you work more in the world of ideas and strategy? All four of these modes are present in every person in different combinations. So let me show you how these can show up. The continuum of each mode, meaning the from one end to the other, is a really great way to think about all of the different places that someone could come from instinctually. So when we look at the four modes and we look at the continuum, let me run through quickly what one end sounds or looks like versus the other end. For the fact finder, which is how we gather and share information, that ranges between those who specify to those who simplify. Sorry, specify should be at the bottom, those who simplify at the top. Follow through, how we organize and design, ranges between those who systemize all the way up to those who adapt. The quick start mode is how we deal with risk and uncertainty, and it ranges between those who innovate to those who stabilize. Those are the two ends of that spectrum. And then finally, the implementer, how we handle space and tangibles. And that ranges between those who demonstrate in more of that 3D world to those who envision. Your result is a four-number combination, something like 3846 or 7373. There's thousands of possible combinations, and they're all distinct. And to be clear, no combination is the right one or a better one. The goal isn't to have any particular score, but instead, the goal is to understand your score and to really understand how you naturally, instinctively solve problems and execute, and then to design your work around it as much as you can. So, for context, my result is 7373. I initiate with Fact Finder. My instinct is to adapt, streamline processes, and find shortcuts. That's my follow through. My 7 in Quick Start pushes me to generate ideas and alternatives, to seek challenges and be very comfortable experimenting. And then my 3 in Implementer means dealing with the abstract comes naturally when I'm problem solving, and I execute by conceptualizing solutions. What that tells you about me is I go deep on research and I move fast, but detailed sequential processes drain me. And I work in ideas more than in physical systems, which my husband and son would tell you when I try to fix something. When I know that about myself, I can stop spending energy trying to be someone who loves building out meticulous project plans with due dates. And my assistant will tell you that is definitely not me. But I can find someone who does it. That is a strategy that frees up my energy and allows me to use my cognitive strengths in an effective way. I want to share a story as an example about a woman that I'll call Veronica. She's a partner at a successful law firm on the East Coast, and she spent years trying to build her practice the way that her mentor, Jim, did. Now, Jim was the firm's chairman and its top rainmaker. He moved fast, he took risks, and the firm rewarded that model of growth. So Veronica, as she was growing her practice, followed his lead. And for years, it just never felt right to her. It was draining in a way that she couldn't fully explain. Now, when the firm brought in Colby Consultants for a leadership retreat, Veronica took the Colby A index, the one we've been talking about, and Jim did as well. And his result was a 3393, which, based on what we just covered, means he's naturally wired for fast action and improvisation, very comfortable with uncertainty, and not particularly detail driven. And on the other hand, Veronica's result was a 7733. So a high fact finder, a high follow through, and she led through research, structure, and very careful execution. She had spent years trying to operate like someone whose instincts were almost exactly the opposite of hers. And once she could see that clearly, it made sense why she felt drained and exhausted, and things started to shift for her. She stopped trying to replicate Jim's approach to building the practice and bringing in clients. And she built her practice instead around what she actually does well, which is nurturing deep client relationships, earning long-term referrals, and developing real expertise in her field. Then she found a partner whose instincts covered her gaps. And that partner handled the quick turnaround tasks that used to derail her focus. And it gave her space to focus on strategic work, the kind of work that really energized her. And this worked. She continued to bring in substantial business just without burning herself out to do it. And that's what makes that's what this data and understanding our cognitive MO makes possible. Once Veronica could see clearly how she was wired and how her partner's wiring covered her gaps, she stopped spending energy fighting herself and started spending it instead on the kind of work and the focus that actually built her practice and the work that energized her. Colby gave her these insights, and what she and the consultant built from there when they sat down and strategized was the answer that helped turn things around for her. So at the beginning of this webinar, I shared with you how 42% are losing roughly one full day because of work that's either outside of their cognitive strengths or within teams that don't allow them to lean into their natural strengths when solving problems. You see, the productivity loss happens when what the role demands and where your instincts land are consistently just pointing in opposite directions, right? We can all do these different ways of problem solving. We can all do the work. It's not about our capacity or our ability or even our willingness. But out of the 12 ways of going about our work, 4 of them are most natural to us. They land in our instincts. It's who we were since we were children. It's our MO. When we begin the creative problem solving process with our most initiating talent, which is our 7 to 10 range, that's when we start to see the productivity unlock and we start to see being able to get into flow. From a team perspective, it's important to consider the variety of MOs you have or don't have in order to ensure that the type of team you're in can work effectively. You might have a team where you need a lot of the same kind of cognitive strengths, or you may have a team where you really need a blend. And there's some very specific work that we do around helping our clients to understand the difference between those two and to help them see their teams mapped out across these 4 pillars so that they can see where the gaps are. The most striking number in this whole report that I've been quoting is that workers who spend very little time working against their instinctive strengths are 6 times less likely to be actively job hunting than workers that are in high misalignment. So not just double, not just, 3 times, 6 times less likely to be actively job hunting. So what we're looking at here is when we can put our employees and our teams and ourselves into roles where we have the freedom to go about our tasks in the way that it's most instinctively natural to us, we end up having the result of 6 times less likely that these high valued employees are wanting to leave. And as we know, replacing one employee can cost somewhere between 50 and 200% of that employee's annual salary. That's according to Gallup. That's conservative, by the way. So is it important for us to be looking at retention or those who might be thinking of leaving due to a factor that we can address? Absolutely. And most leaders don't connect that turnover to the misalignment that preceded it, or they connect it, but they don't quite have a way to measure it and to therefore do something about it. And that's where this comes into play. Let me tell you another story. Azure Standard, which is an operating business that delivers bulk and natural foods across the country. It's the biggest employer in their county, family owned, by the way, is an organization that was battling employee turnover at levels that made it very difficult for them to scale. Because of the insights that came from the Colby Index, their turnover in their key roles was reduced 40%. They were actually introduced to Colby back in 2013, and Karen is the chief experience officer at this company. She took her own Colby and realized that her whole life, she didn't feel she'd been able to actually execute in the way that she naturally would. She was so impacted that she's the one who brought the Colby into the organization and had all of the employees take their Colby. And in terms of strategy, they started prioritizing a greater understanding of how each team member naturally operated, and then incorporating that into how the entire business operated. She said they've taken the Colby and embedded it into the hiring practices, into their leadership development, and into their performance management. And they believe, in her words, that it was the missing piece. It's given them permission, she said, to stop asking people to be someone else as an organization. And here's a direct quote. Now we understand the whole person and not just 2/3 of the person. And we're intervening before people burn out, before they're frustrated, and before some conflict arises that ends up taking them away from us. Her employee engagement is up, and they've seen such success implementing the Kolbe that they now use it with their partner companies as well, their vendors and such. Let me sum up the points that we've made today on the type of insights that Kolbe provides. So the first one is it uncovers for you the instinctive strengths of you and your team. Secondly, it highlights where friction is coming from. The insight number 3 that Kolbe provides is it uncovers where your workload is aligned or misaligned with strengths, both your own, your teams that you're managing, and your workforce at large. One of the analogies I like to share is your cell phone, right? If you pick up your cell phone and you stream videos for 2 hours, the battery drain is going to be much different than doing text exchanges for 2 hours. The fourth insight is that it opens your awareness to any gaps or perspectives that you're missing within your larger team structure. So, what does your whole team do? How does it tend to initiate as a team? What does it tend to resist? Are you missing something that you need to execute on your biggest priorities? And that really speaks to team design. And that's where we come in and we help to interpret these results and help you strategize on how to put this into action. This is how we know what to build when we're designing that perfect solution for you, like you saw on our client journey. This is that big piece of the puzzle that gives us the insights that we need to produce the perfect fit solution for our clients. One more quick application I mentioned briefly, and I just want to touch on it, is the application of using these insights for hiring. Most hiring processes assess 2 things: the resume, some of the interview questions, maybe some skills testing. That's telling you the cognitive piece. Then you do some behavioral interview questions, and that tells you a lot about the affective piece, their values, their personality. How are they going to fit into the culture? What most organizations don't actually assess is that third part of the mind, or the cognitive piece. And that answers the question, does this candidate have the instincts that the role actually demands? So the Kolbe A gives you that insight before you make the offer, not once you've already invested and you're onboarding and you're realizing at 90 days, maybe this person really isn't working out. As we wrap up, I want to share this last stat here. When the workers were asked if your workplace could make one change to help you better use your strengths, what would it be? And 38% of the respondents said to build teams and assign projects based on who naturally does that type of work well, not who has the most bandwidth or the right title. And in the past, that would be a little bit of a guessing game, or it might be something that you would have the insight on after you worked with those people for a while, but you actually can see where those people land and where they would best fit. And we partner with our clients to structure their roles, their teams, and their hiring so they can leverage this powerful success lever. So at the top of this webinar, I said that I would give you something you could do in the next 30 days. And there are 2 ways for you to learn more about this particular assessment. The first is to start with yourself. And the second is to bring this to your team. Let me dig into both of those just briefly. So the first option is for you. If you've never taken the Kolbe A, then this is your natural starting point. It takes about 20 minutes to complete it, and you'll receive an executive debrief with a certified Kolbe consultant and an executive coach. That would be me. Taking this assessment allows you to not only get your results, but to have a one-on-one executive level conversation on what that result means, how it shows up in your work right now, and what you can do with it in a very practical way. Now, many of our clients, when they start with themselves, they immediately say, oh, I need to bring in my number 2 person, whether you're the CEO and that's your COO, or your right-hand person on your team. Whoever you rely on the most, you can add that number 2 person in. Both of you take the assessment. We do a 2-to-1 debrief. So both of you are in that debrief together. You'll learn what that assessment means and what are the insights that you can use. And you'll leave that conversation with a clear picture on how you naturally operate as a pair as well, where your instincts complement each other and where they might be causing some kind of a blind spot or maybe even friction that you've been managing around for years. This does not take a long time to schedule. In fact, you can get it on your calendar in as little as 2 weeks if you're interested in doing that. And that QR code, by the way, gives you a link that can help you get started. The second option here is to bring this to your team. For most of the leadership teams we work with, we are targeting alignment and execution and activities that directly impact the bottom line, the profitability of the organization. And so this is a great place to start. We get the Kolbe data in front of the team. We debrief it through an executive workshop together, and then we know exactly what we're working with. And then what we build from there in terms of strategy depends entirely on what that Kolbe picture shows us. So to book a conversation about either of these options, I'd love you to scan the QR code you see there, and it'll walk you through the next steps in under 10 minutes. Now, if you need more research before making any decision, perhaps you are a 7 to 10 fact finder, I would recommend picking up this book. It's called Do More, More Naturally, and it's written by two of the leaders at Kolbe, and it really explains in more depth what I shared with you today, how it relates to your own ability to get more done, but to do it in a way that's naturally for you. We covered a lot of ground today. The productivity drain that's invisible on most of your, operational reports. We talked about the high levels of stress that the workforce is dealing with, in addition to being asked to work against their cognitive strengths, and the result of that on both execution and retention. And the research is clear. This problem does not resolve on its own, and the organizations that address it structurally by actually designing work around how people operate see significant results and an impact in the day-to-day stress of their most important asset, their people. The capacity that you need is already in the building. The question is, what are you going to do to harness it? Thank you for being here today. I hope that you learned at least 2 or 3 strong insights. I invite you to learn more by scanning the QR code there and getting in touch. Again, my name is Leela Ansart, the CEO of Leadership Impact Strategies, and I'd be thrilled to have a follow-up conversation with you. Don't hesitate to reach out.